Hi folks, my name is Dave and welcome to my 6th video on a series of Jordan and Israel. Today we're going to leave behind the Dead Sea and we're going to travel up the coast and we're going to head to Masada, King Herod's incredible fortified palace that he built on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Dead Sea. It is quite the spectacle. But there's a story that goes way beyond that took place around 70 AD at the same time that the Second Temple in Jerusalem was falling. Then we're going to go out to Ein Gedi. This is where David was hiding from Saul in all those caves up in the mountains. Today it is an incredible nature reserve with awesome trails, and I can't wait to show you this hike that we took going up to David's Waterfall. From there, we're going to start our ascent up to Jerusalem, starting at Jericho. We're going to climb 4,000 feet and eventually get our first view of this incredible city. Can't wait to show it to you. This is a full day and it is a good one. In our last video, we left off with an awesome sunset over the Dead Sea, and it seems like a sunrise this morning is a great way to start off this video. As the sun breaks through, you might get a glimpse of the old cities Sodom and Gomorrah located directly across from us on the other side of the sea. Well, you might not be able to see them as the South Dead Sea didn't exist in those times, and those cities would be underwater today. But most of the experts agree that would be their most logical location. We are off to Masada, where, as I mentioned, Herod the Great built an incredible fortified palace for himself. The fortress sits atop a plateau with steep cliffs and extremely narrow footpaths up and down, making it impossible to penetrate. Herod also built large storage rooms to store food and supplies here. However, King Herod, who was in power when Jesus was born, died around 4 AD. For the real story of Masada, we need to leap forward just one generation to 66 AD during the Great Jewish Revolt. A small group of Jewish rebels known as the Sicarii escaped Jerusalem and made their way to Masada, where they set up camp. The story is so fascinating that a movie was made to document the events.
In 1981, Peter O'Toole starred as the Roman legion commander Lucius Flavius Silva. And Peter Strauss starred as the leader of the Jewish zealots, Eleazar ben Yair, in an epic 6-hour miniseries called Masada. After the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, 900 Jewish zealots hold out against a 5,000-man Roman legion on the mountaintop fortress of Masada.
As Jews were forced to flee Jerusalem, many of them found their way to Masada to join their fellow refugees. In fact, nearly 1,000 Jews made the journey. It's important to understand that due to the mass slaughter and destruction that took place in Jerusalem, they believed they were the last Jews standing in the entire world. It was them versus the powerful Roman army. We'll get back to that story in a minute. But if you're wondering how to get to the top of Masada, there are 2 ways to get there. One is to hike up the ancient Snake Trail, which was one of only 4 trails in and out during the time of the Jewish Revolt. It's called the Snake because of all the switchbacks. And if it's 110 degrees that day, well, good luck, because as an added bonus, there's no shade. The other way is to take the gondola that was built sometime after the Jewish Revolt. Well, almost exactly 1900 years later in 1971. I didn't even break a sweat. Once on top, you can see what a massive area Masada encompasses. Herod had stored food and weapons for an army of 10,000 soldiers here, and there was plenty of room for 1,000 Jewish refugees to survive. Part of their survival was carrying on the tradition of raising and breeding pigeons, and there's plenty of evidence that that took place. You probably think they were raising pigeons for meat, but that was a secondary benefit. The main reason? Pigeon poop. The refugees had one of the best natural fertilizers on hand at all times. And maybe even on their hands. I'm just guessing. Oh, great. Another one of the survival features of Masada is the vast system of cisterns to capture water runoff, which can hold up to 10 million gallons. How do you capture 10 million gallons in a desert that averages only 15 inches of rain each year? Well, the cisterns were created by quarries that provided stones for Herod's palace and other buildings on the premises. Water would flow into the cisterns, cut into the base of the mountain's west side, and it was then carried to the top of the mountain and emptied into several other cisterns. All Herod needed was a couple hundred slaves to fill his Olympic-sized pool, among several other pools, along with his sauna, bathhouses, and other water needs. You'll notice on many of the buildings that there's a black line painted somewhere on the outside. This lets you know that archaeologists have reconstructed everything above the black line to give us a sense of what this looked like back in the days of King Herod. They have done such an excellent job of matching cement color and texture that if the line wasn't there, you'd never know it had been reconstructed. Speaking of archaeologists and excavating, one of the cool things about Israel is that all of the archaeologists agree to leave something for future generations to explore. At Masada, the storage areas built by King Herod have been left exactly as they were found. Now, no doubt the Sicarii used provisions they found there from King Herod, but can you imagine what's buried under that rubble? Someday in the future, the next generation will let us know. Once the Sicarii took over Masada, they modified the fortress to fit their religious needs by dismantling Herod's beautiful palace and repurposing those materials. They constructed living quarters, synagogues, and ritual baths known as mikvahs, among other religious items. So, back to our story. Why would the Romans send their huge 10th Legion army to Masada to conquer the Sicarii and Jewish refugees living on top of a mountain plateau? Well, the Sicarii weren't exactly known for their peaceful diplomacy. They had a reputation for carrying a small sword known as a sika, which could be used in a crowd for undetected assassinations. Folks, they were the original ninjas. They also hated the Romans living in and conquering their country, and they wanted to destroy Roman businesses. If you remember in our last video, we talked about the balsam tree perfume industry, which produced the strongest aphrodisiac known to mankind. These balsam trees only existed in a small patch of land, including Ein Gedi, just north of Masada. On Passover night, a group of Sicarii from Masada came to Ein Gedi and killed 700 men, women, and children that produced the perfume for the Romans. The folks of Masada were a threat to the Roman balsam perfume industry, and a year later, the Romans made the journey to destroy Masada. Just remember, throughout history, it's always about the money. Before we go on with this story, let's go back in time and check out Herod's palatial estate at Masada. The northern palace is an incredible engineering marvel, standing at 145 feet from top to bottom. The top section is actually a replica of King Agrippa's palace in Rome. The upper terrace was Herod's private area, which featured lavish living quarters with mosaic floors, frescoed walls, and a semicircular balcony that offered spectacular views. At that time, the shore of the Dead Sea was much closer, so the view had to be spectacular. The round middle terrace was the family level. It had two concentric rows of columns that created a beautiful balcony for relaxation. The bottom level contained the most magnificent room of the entire fortress, the royal ballroom. It contained an open court inside a colonnade, and of course, the bathroom on the eastern side had hot, warm, and cold baths as well as mosaic floors. Today, these two levels aren't quite what they used to be. When the Sicarii took over, they pretty much demolished the bottom two structures and used those materials for their own purposes, as I mentioned earlier. Just outside the palace entrance, we found a Greek-style building with two pillars at the entrance. However, the interior is very Roman. During the time of King Herod, it was a transition between the two cultures. There's beautiful, high-quality frescoes on the walls painted by great Greek artists from Alexandria. Now, what's interesting about that story is that these artists had worked under the reign of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, But after those two committed suicide, they needed a new gig, so they came over to Masada to work for Herod. Back to our story around 70 AD. In plain view today, you can still see the Roman army camps below that surrounded the mountain. 8 camps in total, along with a 2.5-mile siege wall that prevented the Sicarii from escaping. Now, I mentioned that the 10th Legion Roman army included 5,000 soldiers. However, in addition to their own soldiers, they brought in Syrian soldiers and eventually slaves, which brought their head count up to nearly 13,000. They brought in the extra manpower to do the dangerous work and protect themselves from the Sicarii. You see, the Sicarii had an arsenal of large round boulders which they would send down the mountain whenever the Roman soldiers started moving towards them. Soldiers were unexpectedly being killed and maimed at an alarming rate. But in less than 2 months, the Roman army broke through the walls of Masada by building an incredible siege ramp. Folks, you gotta hand it to the Romans for even thinking they could do this, even with thousands of bodies. It's impossible for the camera to portray the magnitude of this accomplishment. I mean, they basically moved part of a mountain from over there to over here to build this siege ramp. Once they broke through the wall, they were prepared for a huge battle with the Sicarii, but instead, it was eerily quiet. There was no one around. After searching the grounds, they found all the Sicarian Jews dead, except for 2 women and 5 children. They would later tell their story to the famous historian and traitor Flavius Josephus. The refugees knew that once they were the property of Roman soldiers, they would be placed into slavery and their women and children would be forced into prostitution. They agreed that death was preferable to this disastrous plight. This was a mass suicide, but since suicide is forbidden by Jewish law, the men killed their women and children and then drew lots for who would kill who, leaving 1 man left to commit suicide. As I mentioned earlier, the Sicarii built a synagogue from the materials they found at Herod's palace. Now, the excavation of Masada took place in the early 1960s, sponsored by the Israeli Defense Forces. And when the archaeologists discovered the synagogue, they started digging, hoping to find manuscripts of any kind. Little did they know, they would find pieces of the scroll from Ezekiel that prophesied about the dry bones coming to life in Ezekiel Chapter 37. The book of Ezekiel was written around 570 BC, so about 2,600 years ago. But if you haven't read Ezekiel Chapter 37 and 38 yet, this is exciting stuff because some of the things prophesied, like Israel being revived or restored to their land, happened in 1948, just 80-some years ago. God says the dry bones represented Israel, but His plan for Israel is much greater than what we've seen so far. So, could more prophecy be coming to pass soon? I say, watch Israel and stay tuned. Well, in that synagogue today, there's a rabbi on site writing a new Torah scroll. We actually had a reporter on site with an eyewitness observer who just came out of the building. Let's go to the tape.
All right, so Fred, what did you witness inside that room?
I just witnessed a living rabbi write people's name in Hebrew.
Oh, yeah. The point is,
Well, that was awkward. It's interesting that Masada is never mentioned in the Bible. However, many folks believe David may have found refuge here while fleeing from King Saul, who is hunting for him all through this area. Who knows? Maybe. So why is this an important stop on a tour following Jesus' footsteps? I think it's to remind us that God is always near. Now, the Sicarii were more like terrorists than they were Jewish zealots, and yet they were just one generation away from seeing Jesus in real life human form, like their parents did. And yet they seemingly had no hope in a living God. I look at our nation today and I see how quickly our morals and culture have deteriorated since we've kicked God out of schools, public places, and dare I say, our churches. We aren't facing the Roman army today, but we have plenty of enemies that want to take us down and see us fail. And God is always waiting for us to extend our hand out to His. See, God is always there, no matter what battle we're fighting. We just drove 20 minutes north up the Dead Sea coast to arrive at the Ein Gedi Nature Reserve. And wow, talk about an oasis in the middle of a desert. This place is beautiful. Immediately, you're greeted by ibex frolicking in the grass and posing for pictures. But you have to wonder, how did they get here? Well, check out 1 Samuel 24, verse 2, and you'll find out they've always been here. They were known as wild goats back in the ancient times, but they've never left. How cool is that? My thought, when a biblical site starts off with a friendly ibex welcoming you, you know it's going to be a great day. Ein Gedi is also the location where the War of the Four Kings described in Genesis 14 took place, and it's where Jehoshaphat battled the Moabites and the Ammonites. My first knowledge of Ein Gedi was learning that this is the place where David was hiding from King Saul, who wanted to kill him out of jealousy due to David's popularity among the people. The story is found in 1 Samuel chapter 24. David actually had the opportunity to kill Saul when Saul entered a cave and took off his robe to relieve himself. Saul didn't know David was in that same cave, but David's men urged him to kill him. This was his opportunity. But David refused to kill Saul and instead snuck up on him and cut off a piece of his robe. After Saul walked out of the cave, David shouted at him to get his attention and showed him the piece of robe he had cut off. Saul immediately realized his life had been spared and begged David not to kill off his descendants once David became king. Saul and his men then headed back home. Ein Gedi is famous for its date industry, its salt industry, and its vineyards. In the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, Solomon's lover describes Solomon as clusters of henna from the vineyards of Ein Gedi. Much like their balsam tree, henna blossoms contain an essential oil to make perfume. But we are here to experience this incredible nature reserve, and the best way to do that is to hike the trails. We took the trail that led up to David's Waterfall, but as you can see, you can spend several days walking these trails. Back in biblical times, there was a river that flowed through this lower end of Ein Gedi, but as the Dead Sea shrank, so did the river. Today, water still flows underground down here, which they pump to the surface for the plants and animals. However, as you hike up a bit, you are soon surrounded by beautiful waterfalls and streams. As we're walking along this trail, I can't help but imagine which cave David was hiding in. Check out how many caves are in this one area. Some of you may know that about a year and a half before this video was shot, I blew out my knee. Actually, I severed my quad tendon. And unfortunately, it's at least a 1-year recovery process, so this was my first real test on my bionic knee. Parts of this trail pushed it pretty hard, but it did great. And it was a bit sore at the end of the day, but I will take that. This was a really fun hike, but make sure your phone has a flashlight app, as parts of this trail can be dark and slippery. This is such a cool place. It seems like around every turn there's a waterfall or a stream or an awesome view to enjoy. But at the top of our hike, we are rewarded with David's Waterfall, the tallest waterfall in the Judean desert with a 120-foot drop. It's a great place to rest and relax before either heading on to your next hiking destination or back down to the ice cream shop. I mean the parking lot. We have to leave this beautiful spot behind, but we're heading to another beautiful sight, the joy of the whole earth, Mount Zion, the city of the great King, Jerusalem. We're traveling north along the Dead Sea for about 45 minutes, where we'll take a hard left just before we reach Jericho and head up the hill, gaining some 4,000 feet in elevation before entering Jerusalem. But wow, we're going to miss this view. It has been beautiful. On the way up the mountain, we pulled over at a place called the Red Ascent, located near the St. George Monastery. Back in biblical times, this was a very popular route between Jericho and Jerusalem. It was also a very dangerous one. It was a 2-day journey between the two cities, and you would usually stay at a certain guest house, which was considered the halfway point. This area was called the Red Ascent originally from the color of the rocks, but also from the blood of the victims who died here after being attacked by robbers. They knew people were carrying money for the treasury at the temple in Jerusalem, and they were easy targets. Today, the location of this halfway point is known as the Good Samaritan Museum. Yep, you've guessed correctly. This is the place where the Good Samaritan took the Jewish traveler who was robbed and left for dead on the road between Jericho and Jerusalem. He bandaged his wounds, placed him on his donkey, and paid for his care. On top of this hill, we can see how rugged and how beautiful this area is. Down below is the Wadi Kelt River that we mentioned in a previous video, which flows into the Jordan River. If you were traveling with animals, the road would travel next to the river nearly all the way there. But if you were looking to go to Bethany or take a shortcut to the Mount of Olives, you would take the Red Ascent path. The travelers would often sing a song written in Psalm 121 as they walked up the Red Ascent. Our buddy Dave is going to read that to us, mainly because he refused to sing it.
I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Dave. Well, let's get back on the bus. As we look out our bus window, we can see the path that Jesus and his disciples would have taken to get to Bethany. This is where Jesus instructed them to find the colt that he would ride into Jerusalem on what we call today Palm Sunday. We made it through the final checkpoint, and folks, we are in Jerusalem. As we're looking out our windows for our first glimpse of this incredible city, this song fills our ears. I'm not crying, you're crying. We don't have time to walk into Jerusalem today, but we're heading to Mount Scopus for our first view of the city. Mount Scopus is one of 3 summits on the Mount of Olives, which separates Jerusalem from the desert on the other side. Mount Scopus is also where the Hebrew University resides. Any guesses on who their first president was? Albert Einstein. Our tour guide Iran reminded us that we are probably fulfilling the dreams of our ancestors today. Our grandparents and great-great-grandparents could only read about this place in the Bible, never having the opportunity to come here. This is the first time in modern history that Jerusalem is in Jewish hands. That, along with commercial flights today, give us an opportunity to experience this land that was unavailable to past generations. From here, we can see the Tower of Ascension on the Mount of Olives. The Kidron Valley down below. And then the walled city of Jerusalem, along with the adjoining neighborhoods. It is quite a sight to take in. As we head to our hotel, we're able to take a sneak peek at the old city and take in our first look at the Garden Gethsemane, the Church of Gethsemane, the Kidron River, and the Russian Orthodox Church called the Church of Mary Magdalene. We also see the Mount of Olives with all the Jewish graves flowing down the hill. This tradition started during the reign of King Solomon. And down below, you can see the graves of the high priest. Incredible. We're going to end this video with another sunset, this one out of our Jerusalem hotel room window. I can't wait to begin exploring this ancient city in the morning. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button down below and subscribe to my channel. Next time, we're going to be in the heart of Jerusalem, experiencing all these incredible sights. You saw some previews of those a couple minutes ago, but man, there is so much to unpack at all these places. All I can say is, wow. So, thanks again for watching. Until next time, God bless. Take care. Bye. We aren't facing the Roman army today, but we have plenty of enemies.